28F, I found the ring receipt while planning our anniversary surprise, but the size, style, and shipping address weren't for me. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons. This all unfolded 3 months ago, though it feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. I'm still trying to process how quickly everything I thought I knew about my relationship disintegrated. I had been with Nathan for 5 years. We met during my senior year of college when he was a young professor, different department, no ethical issues, at the same university. The connection was immediate, intellectual, emotional, physical. Everything aligned in a way that made me believe in concepts like soulmates, despite my usual pragmatism. By our third date, we were having those soul-bearing conversations about childhood traumas and future dreams that usually take months to reach. By 6 months, we were practically living together, though we maintained separate apartments until I finished my degree to avoid any appearance of impropriety. At the 2-year mark, we officially moved in together, merging our books, furniture, and lives with the careful optimism of 2 people who had both experienced enough relationship disappointments to value what we'd found. Our 5-year anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to plan something special. Nathan had been dropping hints about wanting to visit Vancouver, a city neither of us had explored but both had on our bucket lists. I decided to surprise him with a meticulously planned long weekend there, complete with reservations at restaurants aligned with his culinary interests and tickets to exhibits featuring artists he admired. Planning this surprise required some detective work, checking his teaching schedule for the fall semester, researching the best area to stay based on his preferences, ensuring I wasn't booking activities he'd find boring. This meant occasional stealth missions on his laptop when he was showering or running errands, looking through his calendar and browsing history for clues about what would make the trip perfect. It was during one of these innocent reconnaissance missions that I found the email receipt from a high-end jewelry store. My heart leapt immediately. Was he planning a proposal to coincide with our anniversary? The timing would be perfect, and while we hadn't explicitly discussed marriage recently, it had always been presented as an eventuality in our relationship. With trembling fingers and a giddy smile, I opened the receipt email, already imagining the story we'd tell about how we both had surprises planned for our anniversary. That giddiness evaporated instantly as I read the details. The receipt was indeed for an engagement ring, a 3-stone emerald-cut design in platinum, but several details were immediately discordant. 1. The ring size was 4.5. I wear a 7. 2. The design featured emeralds as the side stones. I've always explicitly stated my preference for a simple solitaire, something Nathan and I had discussed during a casual jewelry store visit years ago. 3. Most damningly, the shipping address wasn't our apartment. It was directed to a residential address in the arts district across town. I sat frozen, my mind racing to find innocent explanations. Was he helping a friend with a proposal? Purchasing it as an investment? Could the shipping address be a colleague's home where he was having it delivered to maintain the surprise? Each rationalization felt increasingly desperate as I stared at the receipt. The truth was forming with devastating clarity. Nathan was planning to propose, but not to me. With a sense of detachment that I now recognize as emotional shock, I copied the unfamiliar address and opened Google Maps. I then navigated to Nathan's location history. We shared locations for practical purposes, nothing controlling, and felt the floor drop from beneath me. There it was. Multiple visits to this address over the past several months, often during times he'd told me he was working late at the university or having drinks with colleagues. Regular visits, following patterns, Tuesday evenings, Sunday mornings, the kind of routine you establish when you're a regular part of someone's life. Still clinging to denial, I searched the address in public records. The property was owned by an E. Sullivan. I didn't know any Sullivans. I opened Instagram on his laptop, where he remained perpetually logged in. Against every principle of privacy I normally held sacred, I typed Sullivan into his search bar. The first result? Eliza Sullivan, a woman whose profile showed she was an art historian at the university's museum, a woman who appeared in several photos on Nathan's Instagram feed, always in group settings, always explained as colleagues or department event. Her profile was public. I began scrolling through her recent posts, feeling increasingly ill with each swipe. There she was at a faculty mixer I had skipped because of work commitments, standing closer to Nathan than colleagues typically would. There they were at a museum exhibition, his hand at the small of her back in a photo someone else had tagged her in. And most recently, a cryptic post from just 3 days ago, a close-up of her hand holding a cup of coffee, caption reading, "Some mornings are more special than others," the geotag showing a cafe 2 blocks from our apartment. The timeline assembled itself with sickening clarity. Based on his location history and these social media breadcrumbs, their relationship had been developing for at least 8 months. 8 months of lies, of carefully constructed alibis, of me waiting at home while he built a connection with someone else. 8 months during which we still said, "I love you" daily, still slept in the same bed, still made future plans that now appeared to be elaborate fictions. And now he was planning to propose to her, perhaps even end things with me, right around the time I was planning our anniversary celebration. As the initial shock began to fade, my body seemed to process what my mind was still struggling to accept. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting, my entire body rebelling against this new reality. I sank to the cold tile floor, trying to breathe through the waves of nausea and disbelief. He wasn't just having an affair, he was planning a future with someone else while maintaining the fiction of our relationship. The calculated nature of it, the deliberate deception required to live this double life, transformed my understanding of who Nathan was, who he had always been. I had 3 hours before he would return from his Saturday afternoon research session at the library. 3 hours to decide how to confront the man I loved about his plans to leave me for someone else. Those 3 hours passed in a blur of alternating numbness and violent emotion. I fluctuated between icy calm and devastating sobs, between methodical evidence gathering and collapsed on the floor breakdowns. I forwarded key emails to myself, took screenshots, saved links, creating a record I didn't yet know how I would use but felt compelled to preserve. When I heard his key in the lock at 5:17 p.m., I was sitting at our dining table, outwardly composed, despite feeling like my insides had been hollowed out and replaced with broken glass. The evidence was arranged before me, printed emails, screenshots, the Vancouver trip itinerary I'd been so excited to surprise him with. "Hey, you're home early," Nathan called out casually, dropping his bag by the door with the comfortable routine of someone who expects their life to continue uninterrupted. "I thought you were having drinks with..." He stopped abruptly as he entered the dining area and saw my face, the papers on the table, the obvious signs of prolonged crying despite my composed posture. "What's wrong?" he asked. Concern seeming so genuine it momentarily made me question everything I'd discovered. How could someone fake concern so convincingly while systematically betraying you? "I found the ring receipt," I said simply, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's beautiful, emerald cut with emerald side stones. Eliza will love it." The color drained from his face so rapidly I thought he might faint. His body seemed to physically diminish before me, shoulders collapsing inward as if trying to make himself smaller in the face of exposure. "Juliana," he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for what could possibly follow my statement. "I was planning a surprise anniversary trip to Vancouver," I continued, gesturing to the itinerary on the table. "Needed to check your schedule, make sure there were no conflicts. Found more conflicts than I anticipated." "I can explain," he said, the cliché so predictable it would have been comical in any other circumstance. Can you explain planning to propose to another woman while living with me? Can you explain maintaining 2 relationships for..." I checked the papers in front of me with exaggerated precision. "Approximately 8 months, based on your location history? Can you explain having coffee with her near our apartment while I was at work? Bringing her close enough to where we live that you risked me seeing you together?" With each question, his expression shifted further from shock to a peculiar resignation. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat heavily, running his hands through his hair in a gesture so familiar it sent a fresh wave of pain through me. No, he said finally, his voice barely audible. I can't explain it in any way that would make sense or hurt you less. His honesty after months of deception was both refreshing and infuriating. Try anyway, I insisted. I deserve at least that much. What followed was a confession that alternated between self-flagellation and justification, between acknowledging the depth of his betrayal and attempting to mitigate it. Eliza had joined the university museum staff last year. They had connected intellectually first, then emotionally, then physically. He hadn't planned for it to happen, hadn't been looking for an affair, hadn't expected to develop such strong feelings. I kept waiting for it to run its course, he explained, staring at his hands rather than meeting my eyes. I thought it was just an infatuation, a midlife crisis at 34. I kept thinking I would end it, come back to our life fully, reconnect with you. Instead, you decided to propose to her, I said flatly. That doesn't sound like something running its course. He flinched. It evolved, became something I couldn't dismiss as temporary. The more time we spent together, the more I realized that you wanted a future with her instead of me, I finished for him when he hesitated. It's not that simple, he insisted. I still care about you deeply, still value everything we've built. Just not enough to be honest with me, not enough to end things before starting a new relationship, not enough to give me the dignity of making my own choices with complete information. His silence acknowledged the truth of my words. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked. Or just come home one day and announce you were leaving? Or worse, wait until I discovered everything after you were already gone? I was going to tell you after the department retreat next weekend, he admitted quietly. I have the conversation planned. I was going to be gentle, take full responsibility. How considerate, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Planning the kindest possible way to tell me you've been living a double life and have decided to choose the other woman. Should I thank you for that? Juliana, please, he began, reaching across the table toward my hand. I pulled back sharply. Don't, I warned. Don't try to comfort me through the pain you chose to cause. We sat in silence for several long moments, the reality of our situation settling between us like a physical presence. Do you love her? I finally asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since discovering the ring receipt. He hesitated, clearly weighing whether honesty or mercy was the kinder choice in this moment. Yes, he admitted finally. I do. And me? Was any of it real with me? Of course it was, he insisted, looking genuinely distressed. What we have, has been one of the most significant relationships of my life. I didn't set out to hurt you or betray what we built together. But you did, I stated simply. Every day for 8 months you made the conscious choice to lie to me, to her, to yourself. You constructed an elaborate deception that required ongoing, deliberate decisions to maintain. He had no response to this. The affair itself might have been forgivable, I continued, surprising myself with this realization as I spoke it aloud. People make mistakes, have moments of weakness. But this wasn't a mistake or a moment. This was a sustained campaign of deception while you test drove another relationship, keeping me as the safe backup option until you were certain about her. That's not fair, he protested weakly. No, what's not fair is spending 5 years with someone who could compartmentalize so completely that he could plan an anniversary surprise with one woman while shopping for an engagement ring for another. As our conversation continued into the evening, more details emerged that only deepened the betrayal. Eliza knew about me, but had been told our relationship was essentially over emotionally, that we were simply cohabitating until I found a new place. She believed she was the primary relationship, just as I had. So you were lying to both of us, I observed. Does she know you still tell me you love me every night before sleep? Does she know about our vacation plans for Christmas? Does she know you've been having sex with me while planning a future with her? Each question landed like a physical blow. Nathan seemed to shrink further with each one, the full weight of his deceptions finally collapsing on him. "No," he admitted, "she doesn't know the extent of our ongoing relationship." "Your ongoing deception," I corrected. "Let's be precise with language, Professor." As night fell outside our dining room windows, practical matters finally surfaced through the emotional devastation. "What happens now?" I asked, exhaustion replacing the earlier anger and shock. "I can stay with a colleague tonight," Nathan offered. "Give you some space." "A colleague or Eliza?" The question was pointed. "A male colleague," he specified. I think we both need time to process, figure out next steps." "I've had 3 hours to process finding an engagement ring receipt for another woman," I said. "I think I'm quite clear on my next steps. This relationship is over. The apartment lease is in my name. You have 2 weeks to find other arrangements and remove your belongings." He nodded, accepting this without argument, perhaps the first unselfish act of the entire conversation. "I am so deeply sorry," he said, standing to leave. "Not just for the pain I've caused, but for betraying the trust you placed in me. You deserved better." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I did." After he left, I sat motionless at the dining table for nearly an hour, staring at the evidence of my shattered relationship and the anniversary trip that would never happen. The pain was so intense it seemed to have physical weight, pressing down on my chest until breathing required conscious effort. Then I did something I had never done in our 5 years together. I reached for his whiskey bottle and poured myself a substantial glass. I wasn't much of a drinker, but the situation seemed to demand some form of liquid courage. Carrying the glass to my bedroom, I surveyed the space with new eyes. How many nights had he slept beside me after being with her? How many times had he absent-mindedly kissed me goodbye in the morning, his mind already on when he would see her next? How thoroughly had I been played by someone I trusted completely? I took a long sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down my throat, and made a decision. I would not let this betrayal define me or my understanding of love. This was Nathan's failure, not mine, and somehow I would rebuild from here. The next morning, sunlight streaming through windows I'd forgotten to close felt like an offense. How dare the world appear normal when everything had changed? I had slept perhaps 2 hours total, my dreams chaotic and disturbing when exhaustion finally pulled me under around 4 a.m. I reached automatically for my phone, finding multiple text messages and missed calls from Nathan. I wasn't ready to engage yet, but one text caught my attention. "Eliza knows everything now. I told her the complete truth last night. She's understandably devastated too. I'm staying at Mark's apartment for now. I'll respect your timeline for moving my things." So the dual deception had fully collapsed. I felt a strange solidarity with this woman I'd never met. Both of us processing the same betrayal from different vantage points, both discovering the man we loved had been living a carefully bifurcated life. The practical aspects of separation provided a welcome distraction from the emotional devastation. I contacted a locksmith to change the apartment locks. I called my supervisor to request emergency personal leave. I methodically removed Nathan's belongings from my daily spaces, his toothbrush from our bathroom, his books from my nightstand, his favorite mug from the kitchen cabinet. Each item extracted from my immediate environment was both painful and liberating, a small reclamation of space that had been saturated with his presence. Friends arrived with disturbing speed once word spread, bringing food I couldn't eat, offering support I wasn't ready to receive, proposing revenge fantasies I had no energy to entertain. My best friend Maya drove 3 hours to reach me, took one look at my face, and simply said, "Pack a bag. You're coming home with me for a few days." The change of environment proved necessary. Maya's guest room became a decompression chamber where I could process the implosion of my relationship without constantly encountering physical reminders of Nathan. Her home, filled with plants and color and warmth, provided a stark contrast to the academic sterility of the apartment I had shared with him. It was on Maya's couch, 3 days after the discovery, that the floodgates finally opened completely. I cried until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen nearly shut, until the initial shock had processed through my system enough for the deeper grief to emerge. I just can't understand how someone could compartmentalize like that, I said when I could finally speak coherently again. How do you live two separate lives? How do you keep all the lies straight? How do you sleep at night? Some people can detach from their actions in ways others can't, Maya replied thoughtfully. They create separate narratives that never fully connect. But I knew him, I insisted. 5 years. I thought I knew everything about him, his childhood trauma, his insecurities, his dreams. How could I have been so completely wrong about who he was? You weren't wrong about who he presented himself to be, she pointed out. You just didn't know about the parts he deliberately hid. This distinction, between being wrong and being deliberately misled, became an important framework as I struggled to trust my own judgment in the aftermath. A week after discovery, I returned to the apartment to find Nathan had coordinated with a mutual friend to remove most of his belongings while I was away. He had left a detailed inventory of what he'd taken, along with a handwritten letter I initially set aside, unable to face his explanations or justifications. Curiosity eventually won out. The letter contained what appeared to be a genuine attempt at accountability, acknowledging the calculated nature of his deception, accepting full responsibility for the harm caused, and expressing remorse that seemed to go beyond simply being caught. He explained that his conversation with Eliza had resulted in her ending their relationship as well, unwilling to build a future with someone capable of such prolonged dishonesty. I've lost everything that mattered, he wrote, and deserved to lose it. I don't expect forgiveness from either of you, but wanted you to know that I understand the magnitude of what I've done, and will be seeking professional help to ensure I never cause this kind of harm again. The letter should have provided some satisfaction. He had lost both relationships, was experiencing consequences proportionate to his actions. Instead, it only deepened my confusion. If he could recognize the wrongness of his behavior now, how had he justified it for months while actively maintaining the deception? 2 weeks after discovery, I received an unexpected email from an unfamiliar address, esullivanuniversity.edu. Eliza had reached out. I hope this isn't unwelcome, she wrote. I've debated contacting you since learning the full truth about Nathan's deception. While we don't know each other, we're perhaps the only two people who fully understand what the other is experiencing right now. If you're open to it, I would appreciate the opportunity to meet in person. My immediate reaction was revulsion. What could I possibly gain from meeting the woman who had been the unwitting other half of Nathan's double life? Yet beneath that initial response was a thread of curiosity. She was right that we shared a unique perspective, both victims of the same elaborate deception. After consulting with both Maya and my newly acquired therapist, I agreed to meet Eliza at a neutral cafe across town, far from both the university and my apartment, minimizing the chance of encountering mutual acquaintances. I arrived early, securing a corner table that offered some privacy. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately from the Instagram photos, though the confident professional depicted online had been replaced by someone who looked as shell-shocked as I felt. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she carried herself with the careful movements of someone navigating while physically injured. "Thank you for meeting me," she said after ordering tea she would barely touch. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, "but I think you were right that we have a unique perspective on the situation." What followed was one of the strangest conversations of my life, comparing timelines, filling in gaps in each other's understanding, discovering the elaborate scaffolding of lies Nathan had constructed to maintain both relationships. "He told me you knew it was ending," she said, her voice hollow. "That you were just roommates at this point, staying together until lease arrangements could be worked out." "He told me he was working late or with colleagues whenever he was with you," I countered, "including the night before our anniversary when he was apparently picking out your engagement ring." Each revelation added another layer to the betrayal. But strangely, sharing these details with the only other person who truly understood, provided an unexpected catharsis. There was validation in our shared experience, confirmation that the deception was about Nathan's character, not our worthiness or discernment. "What I can't reconcile," Eliza said after we had exhausted the factual comparisons, "is how someone can claim to love you while systematically deceiving you. If that's love, what does the word even mean?" "I've been asking myself the same question," I admitted. "I think he convinced himself it was love because acknowledging the selfishness of his actions would have required him to see himself as the villain." "Did you read his letter?" she asked. "He sent me one too." I did. It seemed sincere, but then everything always seemed sincere with Nathan. That was his particular talent, authenticity as performance art. She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant in a way no one else in my life could. As we prepared to leave after nearly 2 hours of conversation, Eliza hesitated. "This might sound strange, but talking with you has been the most helpful thing since this all happened. Would it be completely inappropriate to suggest we meet again sometime?" The question surprised me, but I found myself nodding. "Actually, I think it makes perfect sense. Who better to process this with than someone who understands exactly what you're experiencing?" And so began one of the most unlikely friendships of my life, bonded initially by shared trauma, but eventually evolving into a genuine connection based on mutual respect and surprising commonalities beyond our experience with Nathan. 3 weeks after discovery, I began the practical process of disentangling my life from Nathan's. The shared apartment had become unbearable. Every corner held memories that now felt tainted by deception. I broke the lease, accepting the financial penalty as the cost of fresh start, and found a small studio closer to my office. The physical act of moving became a metaphor for the emotional process, sorting through possessions, deciding what to keep and what to discard, creating a new space that wasn't saturated with memories of the relationship. I purged ruthlessly, keeping only items that felt untainted by association with Nathan. Work provided structure when everything else felt chaotic. I threw myself into projects, grateful for concrete tasks with clear parameters and measurable outcomes. My colleagues were mercifully discreet after the initial wave of concern, allowing me to maintain professional composure during the hours that punctuated emotional processing. Therapy became a lifeline, a space to untangle the complex emotions of betrayal without burdening friends who, while supportive, couldn't fully comprehend the specific pain of discovering a parallel relationship. My therapist helped me recognize that trusting Nathan hadn't been a failure of judgment on my part. He had deliberately presented a curated version of himself designed to maintain my trust while enabling his deception. The most careful person in the world can be deceived by someone dedicated enough to maintaining a false narrative, she explained during one particularly difficult session. Your openness to trust isn't a weakness. It's a capacity for connection that someone exploited. This framework, distinguishing between healthy trust and blind faith, between being deceived and being foolish, became crucial to my healing process. The greatest danger after betrayal is allowing it to close you off from future connection, to translate one person's failure into a belief that no one can be trusted. 6 weeks after discovery, Eliza and I had established a regular coffee meeting that both of our therapists described as unusual but potentially beneficial. Our conversations had evolved from comparing notes on Nathan's deception to discussing our individual healing processes, career aspirations, and gradually other aspects of our lives. I got rid of the ring, she mentioned during one of these meetings. He had returned it after our confrontation, said it was mine to do with as I wanted. I sold it and donated the money to a women's shelter. That's perfect, I said, appreciating the poetry of transforming a symbol of deception into resources for others healing from relationship trauma. What did you do with the Vancouver reservations? She asked, remembering details from our initial conversation. Canceled most of them, I admitted, but kept the hotel. I'm going anyway next month, reclaiming the trip for myself. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. That's even better. The idea of traveling alone to a city I'd planned to explore with Nathan had initially seemed masochistic, but as the trip approached, it took on new significance. A declaration of independence, a statement that I could still experience joy and adventure without him. I reworked the itinerary to reflect my interests rather than our compromised preferences, adding art galleries he would have found boring, and removing restaurants chosen specifically for his tastes. 2 months after discovery, Nathan reached out again, a carefully worded email asking if I would be open to a conversation about gaining closure. I considered the request for several days before declining. There was no further closure to be gained. The relationship had ended the moment I saw that ring receipt, and any additional conversation would only serve his need for absolution rather than my healing process. His response was surprisingly respectful. I understand completely. I wish you nothing but healing and happiness going forward. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. For the first time since discovery, I felt a flicker of something beyond anger and grief. A recognition that whatever personal failings had led to his behavior, Nathan was at least attempting to take responsibility for the harm he'd caused. This didn't mitigate the betrayal, but it did allow me to release some of the bitterness that had been weighing on me. 3 months after discovery found me on a plane to Vancouver, alone but not lonely, a carefully crafted itinerary of self-discovery, replacing the anniversary celebration I'd originally planned. The trip became a pilgrimage of sorts, a deliberate reclaiming of joy, independence, and trust in my own capacity to create meaning. I walked for hours along the seawall, took a cooking class I would have skipped if planning around Nathan's preferences, spent an entire afternoon in a contemporary art museum he would have rushed through. I dined alone at restaurants I chose solely for myself, slept diagonally across a king-sized hotel bed, and gradually rediscovered the woman who existed before and beyond the relationship that had ended so painfully. On my final evening in Vancouver, sitting at a harborside restaurant watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and pink, I realized I had gone several hours without thinking about Nathan or the betrayal. The pain hadn't disappeared. It still surfaced at unexpected moments, but it no longer defined my every waking thought. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "How's Vancouver? Reclaimed for yourself yet?" Our unlikely friendship had continued to evolve, moving beyond our shared experience with Nathan to genuine appreciation for each other's perspectives. "I think so," I replied, attaching a photo of my solitary but satisfying dinner setting. "It feels like a different city than the one I planned to visit with him. Better in some ways." "Because it's authentically yours," she responded, capturing exactly what I'd been feeling. That night, I sat on my hotel balcony watching a city I'd never visited before transform from day to night, lights gradually illuminating against the darkening sky. It struck me as an apt metaphor for the past 3 months. The familiar landscape of my life plunged into unexpected darkness, followed by the slow emergence of new patterns of light. Nathan's betrayal had temporarily shattered my understanding of our relationship and my ability to trust my own perceptions. But in that destruction, spaces had opened for new growth, new connections, new definitions of love and partnership that were more nuanced and perhaps ultimately more resilient. The woman who had planned a surprise anniversary trip while her partner planned a future with someone else was gone, replaced by someone more aware of both human capacity for deception and her own strength in its aftermath. The pain of betrayal would always be part of my story, but it would not be the defining chapter. As I prepared for sleep on my final night in Vancouver, I realized I was genuinely looking forward to returning home, not to the shared apartment saturated with memories, but to my new studio filled with possibilities, to work that challenged me, to friendships old and unlikely new. For the first time since discovering that ring receipt, I felt a sense of gratitude beneath the grief, not for the betrayal itself, but for the opportunity it had inadvertently created to rebuild my life with greater authenticity and self-knowledge than before. Some endings, painful as they are, make space for beginnings that would otherwise never have been possible. And sometimes, the trips we take alone lead us exactly where we need to go. TLDR, while planning a surprise anniversary trip, I discovered my partner of 5 years had purchased an engagement ring for another woman he'd been seeing for 8 months. Both of us had been deceived into believing we were in committed, monogamous relationships with him. The unexpected outcome: losing a dishonest partner, gaining an unlikely friendship with the other woman, and rebuilding a more authentic life. Edit 1. Many have asked if Nathan is still alone after losing both relationships. Last I heard, from mutual friends I couldn't entirely avoid, he's in therapy and not dating. Eliza and I occasionally discuss whether his remorse was genuine or simply regret at being caught. While it doesn't really matter to our healing, I believe it was a mix of both. Genuine remorse filtered through the same compartmentalization that allowed the deception in the first place. Edit 2. For those wondering about the Vancouver trip, yes, I really did go alone, and it was both harder and more healing than I expected. First night was rough. Cried in the hotel bathtub with room service wine. By the last day, I was making plans for future solo travel. Sometimes reclaiming experiences for yourself is the most powerful response to betrayal. Update, 6 months later. Life continues to evolve in unexpected ways. I've settled into my new apartment and recently accepted a promotion that would have been challenging to navigate within my previous relationship. Requires occasional travel. Eliza and I still meet for coffee regularly. What began as trauma bonding has evolved into a genuine friendship based on shared interests beyond our unfortunate connection. She's recently started dating someone new and approached it with appropriate caution and impressive clarity about her boundaries. As for me, I'm not dating yet, but no longer feel opposed to the possibility. The trip to Vancouver sparked an interest in solo travel, and I've since taken weekend trips to 3 other cities I've always wanted to explore. Nathan reached out once more about 2 months ago, asking if we could meet as friends. I declined, explaining that while I no longer harbor anger, friendship isn't possible given the foundation of deception. Some chapters are meant to close completely to make room for new stories to begin. Thank you all for your support during the darkest period. Your comments helped me feel less alone when I needed it most.